Much for joining on. Wanted to catch up with you and talk about the new release, Automatic, and congratulations on getting that out to the public. That's fantastic. Yeah, I wanted to just maybe ask a couple of questions about a little bit about the process and just
Sure.
For the indie musicians out there that might want to know a couple of the details as we dig into it a little bit. And one thing that occurred to me was that I was curious as to well, let's get you talk a little bit about the background of making the record, because I want to know why it's an EP and not an LP. And maybe you can break a little bit of that down if you're cool with that.
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, I mean, this was a bit of a process, the whole thing. So to kind of answer your question, I'm going to answer your question at the same time as I kind of break down I guess recording process. So what initially started, like some of these tracks off of this EP, some of them are 5 years old. Some of them are brand new from that were written last year. So it was a bit of a process through the whole thing of starts and stops. We initially were planning on going into the studio. 2020 was the plan. And then obviously things happened. So yeah, it kind of was like delay after delay after
delay. Did something happen in 2020?
And so obviously a lot of things were yeah. Just a little bit of the world getting tied up in a pandemic, but no big deal. So yeah, the plan was to go into the studio and record some songs, and obviously that got put on hold. And the problem that we kind of went into the pandemic was that we didn't really have anything ready to go to put out there, whereas I know other artists had already recorded tracks, had albums that were ready to go or very close to that could be finished by one person in a room, as opposed to going into a studio and finishing things up. We didn't have anything. We didn't have anything for content, music videos. So it was all a bit of patchwork as we went through it. And fortunately, though, we were able to get into the studio in I believe it was 2021, to record a few songs. There we did 3 songs with Dave Schiffman at Dreamhouse in Toronto, and then we added a couple songs. One was done at Genesis Studio in Toronto in 2023, and as a cycle in the band's kind of history. And
nice. Yeah, you mentioned that there was obviously some hurdles. You had some things in the background that you had worked on for a number of years, I guess. And as the progression sort of went, when did this decision get made to work with a producer, and what was the process like in that decision-making process?
That was a decision that we made with management at the time, and we were looking to essentially get somebody outside of the bubble, the band bubble, to collaborate with. I think sometimes it's very easy to get stuck in this bubble, and it sounds great to us. We've played it over and over again. It sounds it's the best thing ever, and then as it comes out, and then people don't really gravitate to it, and why is that, and all this kind of stuff. So we were trying to bring somebody in to help us to kind of dissect everything and make sure that we were getting the best out of that song and that idea as we possibly.
So did he come in, because there's some of those songs that obviously made it to the EP that have been around for a while, but did he come in and kind of reassess how those, like what was his input on some of the material that had been released prior?
We kind of sent him everything. So we sent things that had already been recorded. We sent him demos of the ones that we ended up recording with him. He had some input on just it was more so the 3 tracks that he produced that he had the input. on. But the other tracks, I mean, he did listen to them and he gave us some pointers and all that. But I don't think we ended up. No, we didn't end up re-recording any parts for those. So it was primarily, so Feeling High was one track, Automatic and New Emotion. Those were the 3 tracks that we did with him.
Nice. And what was the writing process like with a producer in the mix? Was it an adjustment for you guys?
No, not really. I mean, it was welcomed.
Mhm.
I really I really had this idea fixed in my head that we needed to properly, go through the process and do the pre-production and things like that. I'd always wanted to do that properly, to really dig into things and make sure that we're 100% prepared to go into the studio, as opposed to, sitting there midway through a session in the studio and going, maybe we should do this, maybe we should do that. And, I wish we had thought of this or that, and really just maximizing our time in there. Yeah.
Nice. And then how did Dave come about in terms of, was it just something where you looked him up, or was someone had a contact with him already, or how did that come about?
Yeah. So the management company that we were at with previously, they had another band that they had worked with that had made an album with him. So there was that connection. There were a few names that we were kind of floating around back and forth, and decided to reach out to him. And unfortunately, he was in Toronto around the time that we were looking to record. So he typically comes into Toronto. I don't know if he still does this or not, but for 6 or 8 week chunks. So we were fortunate enough to get in to one of those periods when he was here, because he's flying in from LA, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. That's great. Well, and it's kind of this recurring theme with independent musicians that, working with a producer is this hurdle in some cases, where it's like you're not sure if you're giving up creative control, and you're not sure if how the because ultimately I would say the personalities still need to jive, and there needs to be a creative synergy to ensure that there isn't this kind of he doesn't get it, or he's not, or he or she doesn't have the vision of what we're trying to achieve here. So I'm glad to hear that it was that wasn't necessarily a factor in this case, and that it was pretty smooth.
Yeah, we had a couple conversations with him prior to going through the whole pre-production process and recording with him, and yeah, it's super important to make sure that everyone's as close as they possibly can be to on the same kind of level and idea of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah,
and yeah, it was good.
That's excellent. So, and then in terms of the decision for an EP, I mean, was it like, okay, we'll reach a point where we're just going to call this thing done, and we're not going to go any further? This is the statement piece. Like, how did that conversation go?
Yeah, we had always, I mean, we talked about going kind of the singles route.
Yeah.
And then developing it, releasing singles and trying to stretch out as much as we possibly could, given the situation and everything kind of up in the air. And then bringing into the EP package at the end with some new tracks as well. I think, some of it was timing, some of it was budget constraints. It was there was a bunch of different factors, so it wasn't just one thing. I wish we could have done 10, but this was fine too. And yeah, I mean, it felt like an eternity just in itself with these 6 songs. So it was like, okay, let's get them out there and kind of on to the next thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's so interesting because a lot of musicians these days reflect on the importance of having an album as a statement, and yet even so, it's rare to find, even as musicians, the time to sit down and listen to a full-length album. Even though that is ultimately my preference 100%, is because I want to hear how it was intended to flow, the entire piece, start to finish, there's a lot of conversation and blood, sweat, and tears that goes into the formatting and just the entire statement, the dialogue, right, that exists with an album. So and yet, you know, it's just not the way that people consume the medium anymore, you know, which is tragic. But at the same time, it's, you know, it's sort of this necessity, or maybe that's how we've evolved or devolved as a species to listen to music.
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
I know all I was gonna say was I think it's kind of come full circle to what was done decades ago, where it was you'd put a single out and get it on the radio in order to promote your shows, as opposed to releasing you know, these albums, double albums, and all that kind of stuff that I think seemed to come to a height in, you know, the 90s. 80s, 90s, maybe early 2000s even too, but before pre-Napster days, I guess. And it's funny how it's come back around as primarily a promotional tool as opposed to, you know, a revenue generating thing.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting that even now, there's the intent to create the fuller piece, the fuller creative work, rather than it being, you know, just a set of singles sort of ad nauseum that go on and on and on. That's what I was curious about the way you approached it, because there had been some length of time between the release of those singles, and then you have the full statement piece come out with those included. So, but that's fascinating. And I also wanted to find out whether you had decisions about, you know, what are your plans for the physical, like, are you going to press records? Are you going to make CDs, etc.? Or if you haven't already?
At this point, someone says, "Hey, are you gonna press CDs or vinyl or anything like that?" Probably not. I'll be completely honest with you. We took a different approach with the single Leon and the EP, in terms of just the way that we're going about doing things, and playing, you know, there were years where we were playing, you know, 60, 70, 80 shows a year. And we do, you know, the regular kind of, you go out, you kind of pound the pavement and record, you know, an album or an EP or whatever the case might be. And it's really, it's harder to do now, I think, than it used to be. The cost of things is crazy.
Yeah.
And we kind of sat down, and Derek and I sat down and went, okay, what's getting across to people? Like, how are we, I hate to say return on investment, but it's what the return is. Like, how are we picking up fans? Are we picking up more fans, you know, doing things the online route? Or are we picking up more fans by driving around and, you know, maybe some nights we're playing to, sure, a couple hundred people. Some nights you're playing to 5 people. How many of those people are we actually getting, you know, to listen to our stuff and kind of join us for the ride? And we've kind of been weighing those things out. And I don't know what the answer is, if there is an ultimate answer, but it's just kind of, that's kind of where it comes back to every time we're thinking about next steps and what's the best way of doing this, and is there anything that we can do to take advantage of things like technology, right?
It's interesting because you mentioned that you're wanting to kind of veer away from the terminology like return on investment. And what's interesting now is that it's actually been the same for a long period of time. Maybe it's just a lot more visible now that artists have to have this business acumen and the marketing mindset. And from a marketing perspective, it's, you know, your product is ultimately something that needs to make money. And yet, and Dave, the guitar player in my band, and I talk about this a lot, but he's saying, you know, music is unique because the product itself is so undervalued that you don't end up making money off of ultimately what, you know, what the whole focus is on, which is odd, you know, to say the least. So when you're trying to compile feedback about like, what are we going to do to actually generate some revenue? the conversations maybe center in around, well, can we do merchandising? Can we do physical copies of the medium? But it only really makes sense if you find that there's a demand for people to purchase physical copies of the medium to justify the expense.
Yeah. I mean, from the two things that obviously the EP, but also the single that we've released, I have had 0 people ask me if we're doing CDs. You're the first.
That's
Which kind
interesting.
of, yeah, which I was surprised at. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
just to do this, to kind of feel it out, right?
for sure. I mean, our second record, we didn't get any physical copies made either. I mean, it was just one of those things where, like you, it's a kind of like, well, no one was asking for it, and
Yeah.
now even just in this like short period of time between release 1 and release 2, for us it was 2 years. There's been significant changes, and even now, here we are, 2024. It's almost a given that to go the distance and actually make a physical copy is such a significant expense. And then we even got pushed back in some cases from people saying about the environmental impact of creating a physical medium that ultimately is, so there's like that side of it as well. But then again, it's how do you monetize, with your original craft? And it's challenging, but I mean, so I was curious about your discussions as far as that's concerned, and was there a decision about should we actually get some pressed? And because there's still that sense of longevity, right, with something that's physical you can hold in your hands.
Yeah, there was talk about it. We did talk about it, but I mean, we also said, well, where are people going to play it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like it's any of the newer cars don't have it. A lot of laptops and things don't have it. So it's like, where do you even play it if you want to? Or is it more of a like something just to hold on to as a souvenir?
Yeah.
Or merchandise, and some people do like that, which is totally fine. But yeah, like do we use these few $100 over here in the budget? Do we spend that on physical, or do we put it towards something else that could bring more people into the fold, right?
Yeah. So release wise, presumably obviously on all the the usual suspects as far as Spotify, etc. And do you have a release on do you leverage Bandcamp as well? I didn't check that platform.
We don't have it up on Bandcamp yet, but we will. Yeah.
And the only reason I mentioned that is because it's like that seems to be one of the platforms that actually allows for a little bit of revenue generation should your fan base be willing to do that. So it's just interesting to see that. The only issue with that obviously is just volume, because it's not as widely adopted or as ubiquitous. So that's great. I was also interested in talking to you a little bit about a comment that was on some of your kind of diaries of making the record on TikTok, which are really well done, by the way. And one of the comments was the kind of, I don't want to say identity crisis, but something that you guys have combated as far as are you a rock sound? Are you a funk sound? And I'm wondering what's driving that dialogue. Is that something that's coming from internal, or is that something that's coming externally to you guys, or how is that kind of shaping out?
It's always kind of, it's interesting. It's always kind of been there. I guess a little bit of both. It was always, as far as external, the comment was always, it's like we weren't hard enough to hang with the hard rock boys, and we weren't soft enough to hang with the indie guys. And at least the scene has been primarily a bit of both. Like there's not much in between. Specifically in Toronto and the GTA, I find or have found it's a little bit better now, just because you have more blending of the genres and stuff like that. But that was kind of where we sat, and it was always like, okay, and then going back to like trying to get fans into the fold. So we always felt like half the time we were performing to the wrong audience. So it was a bit of, I mean, we're kind of And yeah, part of it is, it sounds a little more commercial than other things too. So, that wasn't cool for some people. And then, this and that and whatever. At this point, it's like, whatever,
Yeah.
whoever wants to grab onto it can. And honestly, we've had more people reach out from outside of Ontario specifically and outside of Canada. Um, and I think that's just there's just more people, and there's just more different things going on. And it's not a knock against anything here at all. It's just there's just more of everything else. So there's more space for us to slot in with band A and B or whatever the case might be. But yeah, it's a lot of it was external, and then internal, just the dialogue was like, okay, where do we go? Where's our crowd? Where's our audience, sort of thing. And it hasn't been easy to kind of find that, but it seems with the last few singles it's a little easier, and I think it's just the style of the songs that have come out. It's a little more palatable for a broader audience. Let's put it that way.
I like that approach, because it almost makes it as though, if it's not well defined, you have the ability to connect with listeners that don't identify you as one way or another. It's almost like this kind of this secret of this genre band that we can't identify. It's just we like their sound, and we like where they're going. And so I guess ultimately the real question is, do you feel comfortable with the undefined genre as it sits now? Are you feeling like you're bringing it across because this is what's being written from the heart, and genre be damned?
Yeah. And to be honest, like, I mean, there's so much mixing of genres and things, which I think is actually really, really cool. And before it was you were rock or you were country or you're pop or whatever, and now it's kind of all blended into one, and people are okay with that. And it's like, oh, okay, we can listen to other things. Like, that's okay. And I think that's benefited us. I mean, a lot of people will just go, oh yeah, they're a rock band, but I don't know, not quite that easy. And yeah, and it makes for better music. And even some of the stuff that we're writing now, is definitely different from this stuff coming out, and it's okay, and that's cool, and we can kind of experiment with that, and like you said, it's kind of coming from here and what we want to do, and yeah, and that's fine. And whoever wants to join us for the ride, then sure. We're always looking for other people to kind of play music for.
Yeah, absolutely. So through the process, what are kind of some of the major lessons you feel you've learned? What could you impart to other sort of indie musicians and otherwise? Anything you would have done differently as far as this EP?
Would have stopped the pandemic before.
Right. That's a good idea.
Number one. I think part of it was there was always this hurry up and wait. And I think while that can be good to assess things, I think too much of it is just, yeah, it kind of drains the situation, and there'll never be a perfect time. So if that's, if the plan is to get it out there, put it out there, but do it properly, obviously, because you don't want to waste, your art and time and effort. But in the same breath, yeah, you can't just keep waiting and pushing back and holding back on things. And yeah, if we could speed it up, I mean, yeah, that would have been ideal for sure.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing would be just to keep writing, because again, with the hurry up and wait, we were writing and then stopping. Okay, what's going to happen with this? What's going to happen with this? And in the meantime, we could have been producing even more material. Obviously, it's a little bit harder when everyone's in isolation, but yeah, you can make it work. And obviously now we're not. So yeah, just keep writing. It makes for better better music in the end.
Yeah.
And then just one more back to the producer and co-writing thing. I was always afraid of co-writing with people because I thought it's not mine then, right?
Mm.
It's what people do when they can't write. But I have found through co-writing over the last few years that it's actually it's really good, and it's really good to watch other people do it, especially those that know what they're doing. Because I've learned a ton just from co-writing with other people, being in the same room with them, or even we've had like Zoom sessions, and fortunate enough to write with some people that have written for bigger artists or are bigger artists, and yeah, that's been if you can do that, I think it's incredibly beneficial.
That's interesting. So how did you go about that process yourself? Was that you you sought people out that you knew were writing music in the similar vein, or how did you decide on who to write with?
Yeah, some of them we had to kind of reach out to those people. Um, excuse me. And and some of it was through our previous manager as well. A few of them were through him. And yeah, it's just seeking them out, and a lot of them are more than open to working with indie artists as well. Like, you don't have to
Hmm.
be someone who's selling, or streaming, I guess, millions, to work with them. A lot of them are more than open, and I find that I know the comment was said to us a few times that it was refreshing working with a rock band.
Hmm.
And so yeah, because I mean, a lot of them are into the especially country stuff. So yeah, it was interesting, and excuse me, um yeah, really beneficial, and that's how we got in touch with a few of them.
I love that. That's and that's really interesting what you're saying about the preconceived notion of co-writing with someone, what you envisioned that process would be like. And then, it's almost like we have to take a step back and humble ourselves a little bit as writers and creators, and be open to other ideas. I guess because ultimately it's what's best for the material. It's not what I, as a writer, can put forward and have my name on it and that sort of thing. It's more
Yeah.
so, what works best for the larger effort.
Yeah, and it's like, it's you're learning from all those guys, but also you have to kind of let go of it too, because obviously, just like it's a very personal thing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
somebody else putting their hands on that piece of work for a lot of people, and it was like myself, it's kind of hard to let go of. But yeah, it was, for the way we kind of looked at it was, if this means making the song the best that it can be, then it's totally worth it. Yeah. And it was.
Nice. Yeah, that's excellent. So what's next in terms of backing up the LP? Is there a tour date set, or you have shows coming up that you want to talk about?
So yeah, so we're doing a little bit more writing and recording over the next few months.
Nice.
And then we've got the one that's announced so far is we're playing Venue by Venue festival in London, Ontario in November.
Okay.
And we've got a few more dates in the works for the fall.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be, September, October, November kind of area. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. Nice. Well, it's a great record. Really enjoyed listening to it, and it's got
Thank you.
I want to say sophistication, which might, I don't know, that sounds like a frou-frou word, but it's as though there's really an established confidence in how it comes across. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So I know lots of other folks, if they haven't heard it yet, they will certainly hear it and enjoy it as well. Yeah, so you said you're writing, you're going to be playing more in the next upcoming few months. any sort of parting words for independent musicians as they sort of, carry on with the post-pandemic, trying to make sense of the world in AI-ridden, maelstrom of craziness that's going on out there?
I'll leave you with something that I kind of heard and latched onto, and that's just to keep going. It's half the battle is just to keep going, and yeah, that's a lot of people won't stick with it because it's not easy.
Nope.
But if you stick with it, yeah, I think there's there's the benefit of putting out your artwork, and at the end of the day, it's really about that and connecting with people that way.
Well said. Couldn't agree more. All right, man. Well, I really appreciate your time today. Yeah, it's been great to have you on, and please go and stream and download and purchase on Bandcamp when it's up there, Automatic by the Lad Classic.